Okay, so knight f6, pawn to c4, e6. We don't know what this is going to be yet. This could be a Nimzo Indian. This could be a Queen's Indian. It could be a later. It could be a Benoni. It could be so many different things. So we're not clear yet what this is. g3. Okay, Altortsev's going for, if black plays d5, that would be a Catalan opening. But here, Levenfish plays the move bishop to b4 check. Okay, so the Bogo Indian defense. The idea is just really rapid development for black, and black is able to get the king safe pretty quickly. And with the move knight to c6, black is already telling us which setup he's going for, and it's going to be a dark squared pawn setup, which actually makes a lot of sense. So one of the oldest tricks in chess is if you give away a certain bishop, like for example, black has given away the dark squared bishop for another dark squared bishop, but that's not really the point. The point is black has given away the dark squared bishop. So what do? You want to place your central pawns on the same color as that missing bishop so that your pawns can help you cover some of the squares that your gone baby gone bishop can't cover anymore, right? And so what black is trying to do after knight c6 is to go pawn to d6 and pawn to e5 and occupy some of the center on the dark squares with the pawns. And as you will see, that's going to do two things. So let's progress a little bit here. Okay, so both sides did sort of normal things. They developed in castles. So remember, black gave away the dark squared bishop, and now black has used the central pawns and put them on the dark squares. That makes a lot of sense for two reasons. You don't have a dark squared bishop, so the pawns help you cover the dark squares. And two, the bishop you have remaining will not be obstructed by the central pawns, because the bishop that you have remaining is on the opposite color of those central pawns, which is positionally speaking exactly what you want. You do not want your central pawns blocking your bishops, right? So this whole strategy is very well known, but that's the idea behind it, okay? So you can see that black actually does not have a bad piece in the position. If there was something, I don't want to say bad, but if there was something that was in white's favor here, because I'm talking a lot about the benefits of black's position, but white does have something in his favor here. What is it? Space, exactly. C complex, chess lover, you guys got it. So black does not have a single bad minor piece, but black lacks a little bit of space. And so that's white's advantage in the position, while for black, you know, I think black's position is perfectly acceptable because even though black lacks space, black does not have a bad minor piece. The light square bishop is perfectly fine. The knights are fine, although black will need to fight for some space in order to use those pieces to find effective places for those pieces. And he does, so the whole game is played well. E4, white gains more space. The long-term risk of playing the move e4 is that the bishop on g2 could be obstructed later in the game by all of those pawns. But white is relying on this space, and white will look to potentially break through on the queen side using all that. Okay, knight to d7. Well, I would say that black is telegraphing to us what he wants to do. So the Levenfish just played the move knight to d7. What move is Levenfish preparing? f5. Exactly. Black must fight back and obtain some space for his own pieces. So, yeah, Levenfish going for the f5 break as to open up his rook and to give himself some space as well. So, knight to e1, f5, and knight to e1 looks weird, but a lot of times the knight bounces off the e1 square, comes over to d3, where the knight can help assist with a queenside pawn storm. Another thing is that white may also wish to attack the king side with f4, although I've never really been a big fan of that. I feel like if your advantage is on the queen side, you should just go for that instead. So f5 was played. Knight to d3. And here I feel like if I was playing white, I would definitely take this pawn. I know that Altortsev didn't want to take it because it allows the knight into d4, but after what he did, Black did something which makes white's idea look bad here. What did Black do? Yeah, exactly, f4. And f4 is a strong move, which ensures that the f4 break is not going to happen. It fixes these central pawns on the light squares, which means that this bishop is going to be blocked in for the foreseeable future. And, Black has an attack coming. It's not like Black is doing nothing at all here. So I think white should have taken on f5, which would have done two things. After taking on f5, even though it allows this knight into d4, it doesn't allow that pawn wedge with f4, and also it begins to clear the pawns out of the way of this bishop. Okay, so yeah, knight to d3 I'm not a huge fan of. f4, and here I'm extremely surprised with Altortsev's move g takes f4. As recommended by Chess Lover in the chat, I would say that bishop to h3 makes a lot of sense to me. This is the last opportunity to improve the placement of the light squared bishop, which is obstructed by the pawns. Just get that light squared bishop into a more meaningful, meaningful place. So, okay, pawn takes f4, bad mistake, pawn takes, and what? This is, depends on your skill level and how easily you're going to be able to answer this. To me, there is a glaring weakness here that white has allowed, and it's different than white's king position being jacked up a little bit. It's a square weakness, and to me it's just like obvious. Like when I see this position, I'm just like, that square is gonna have all of my pieces on it. If I could put 30 pieces on this square, I would. Which square is it? Yes, it is the e5 square. The e5 square is what I was looking for. If we can occupy and blockade the e5 square, positionally speaking, that means the world. Because if I can get a knight to e5, that stifles all of the play that white has with the center pawns, particularly the e4 pawn. If white can never play the move e4, e5 to clear the way for his pieces, white's pieces are tripping over each other. If black can occupy the e5 square with a piece, black will also have a beautiful mobile majority on the king side, and black will be helpless to that. So, or white will be helpless to that. So knight f3, knight to g6, eyes on the prize, which is this beautiful e5 square that has opened up. Rook c1, queen e7, again, pieces directed toward the occupation of this beautiful square. And he's like, no way, man, no way. Knight e5. And after some trades here, you can see how dominating this knight is, and the black pieces are really working against, well, the bishop on g2, but of course also eventually the poor white king. So f3 was played, b6 was played, which I like because it slows down the c5 break. Knight takes e5, queen takes e5, and now we have a late middle game, early end game, where there's just a glaring detail. And the glaring detail is really bad bishop blocked behind its pawns, and really good bishop not blocked behind its pawns at all. And if we remember, one of black's strategies in the opening was to place the pawns on the dark squares as to not get in the way of his bishop, whereas white sort of has done the opposite. So the way Levenfish carries out this game, showing the power of the bishop, is just like the better bishop, is just fantastic. So Levenfish just, again, this e5 square is just so important. Altortsev tries to go for some space, tries to break the queen side down. Levenfish says, nope, I'm not going to easily allow this. Yeah, so Ali Monaghan asks if why not pawn takes? But yeah, you don't want to allow these pawn breaks. Like if you take with a pawn here and white can play c5, white has the better game now because white is the one that has the pawn breaks in the space. Yeah. So rook takes makes a lot of sense, and you have a 3-on-2 majority on the king side. So that's going to help you in the end game. And of course, the whole point really is that you're working against, I should say, the bishop on g2. So a3, a5. I like the move a5. b3 as to not allow the wedge pawn to a4. So b3. King f7, a wonderful move, preparing the king for the endgame, but also preparing the advance of the majority, which is this 3-pawn majority on these 2 pawns. Yes. So king f2, king f6, and I really like the switcheroo here that black chooses. Black says, I want to blockade this square as to not allow you to play your pawn breaks, but I don't want my rook to stay here for the rest of the game, so I'm going to put my king there, and I'm going to liberate my rook. So king e2, rook h5 with tempo, and then the king will occupy the e5 square. So the e5 square is really the passageway into the position. And blockading that square as to not allow, any pawn advances is also really good. But basically, this king has freedom in the endgame through these dark squares. That is indeed the passageway into the white position. So rook h1 guarding the pawn, king to e5 here. But this is just total domination. And that is beauty to me in chess. So king to d3, that is to not allow the king any infiltration later or now. h6, waiting for the right moment. h3, and that might even be the last straw because rook to g5 and the g3 square, thanks to this pawn, has become weakened as well. And rook h2, rook to g3, and this is just absolutely wonderful. Black is going to advance the majority of pawns, and he'll have his rook in front, and he'll have a rook behind him, and there's no stopping it. So we'll see how the game ends, but it's really wonderful. I mean, this is like picture perfect. Again, this rook cannot infiltrate at the present time because that would drop the bishop. So king f2, g4, again, the use of the majority, it's all these things tied in together, right? It's the bad bishop, it's the active king, it's the use of the 3-on-2 majority, where because of this blockade, white cannot use their 5-on-4 majority, right? It's all these things coming together to paint like this Picasso picture of just beautiful positional chess. So rook to d1, king to c3, and now every piece is just so active, right? Even the king is participating in the assault. Rook h7, g takes to f3, ignoring the attack on the bishop because of the simple counterattack on the bishop on g2. Bishop to f1, king c2, a real smack in the face, just gorgeous king play here. And the fantastic ending blow here, bishop to h3, with a overloaded theme against this bishop on f1. Just a gorgeous game by Levenfish against a very strong master. So bishop to h3. So what happened was rook takes f3. Again, the whole point is, like, let's suppose rook takes bishop. If bishop takes h3, the king takes here. So black is up the exchange with a dominating position, with the king is already in the game. If bishop takes bishop, we simply take the rook immediately. So the bishop on h3 is taboo. I mean, you cannot take it. So rook takes f3 is what happened. Rook takes f3, and bishop takes f1, and I mean, the move bishop h3 wins a piece. It just does. Like, there's nothing to do about it because you're threatening to take and take. There's nowhere for this rook to go. So this lost a piece, and Altortsev resigned shortly thereafter. So, like, Levenfish escorted his pawn down the board while gobbling up the rest of them. And here, Altortsev resigned, but the last few moves weren't as important. In fact, bishop h3, the final blow, is a beautiful move, but it's not my favorite part of this game. Bishop h3 is a byproduct of black's positional domination, which in fact is most of the time what happens in positional games. You place your pieces wonderfully, and then you just have like a knockout tactic. But it's a result. It's not like it comes out of thin air. It's a result of just dominating your opponent. Hi, I'm Peter Giannatos, founder of the Charlotte Chess Center. Be sure to subscribe or risk losing a knight in your next chess game.